They say girlhood friendship is the most fragile yet powerful bond in the world. It's blood oaths, shared secrets, and endless messages until dawn. We're used to believing that female aggression is just backstabbing whispers or poisonous comments on social media. But what happens when that sacred connection mutates? When behind those glossy Instagram filters hides not teenage insecurity, but ice-cold, calculated sociopathy? Morgantown, West Virginia. A July night in 2012. A quiet suburb where the scariest thing that could happen was a bad grade. 16-year-old Skylar Neese leaves her bedroom window open. She believes that on the other side her two best friends are waiting, Sheila and Rachel, the ones she shared every joy and heartbreak with. She jumps into their car, never suspecting that in 40 minutes, her life will end in the woods miles from home, to the sound of her own screams. This isn't a story about jealousy over a boy. It's not about money or revenge. This case shook seasoned detectives with its terrifying, almost absurd simplicity. When, after months of lies, fake tears, and Twitter posts, the truth was finally dragged into the light. The world heard a phrase that would become the epitaph of this friendship. "We just didn't like her anymore," one of the killers would say. "We just didn't want to be friends with her." 3 friends, 2 killers, 1 knife, and the silence that fell that night in the West Virginia woods. A silence we are breaking today to understand. How do ordinary girls turn into predators hiding behind the mask of best friends? To understand how something so monstrous took root in the quiet waters of Morgantown, we have to go back to the years before their social media feeds were poisoned, back when forever felt like an unbreakable promise. Your likes and comments help promote our videos, and please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. West Virginia is a land of dense forests and people who value their silence. Morgantown is no exception. In the early 2000s, it was a town where life revolved around the high school, the local diner, and Sunday service. It was here, in a cozy apartment on Cassville Pike, that Skylar Neese grew up. For her parents, Dave and Mary, Skylar was everything. An only child, prayed for and infinitely loved. She grew up in an atmosphere of absolute trust. Look at her childhood photos, a wide, honest smile, and a gaze without a hint of pretense. By 16, she weighed about 120 pounds, a petite, energetic girl who wasn't afraid of hard work. While her peers were spending their parents' money on makeup, Skylar was flipping burgers at the local Wendy's. She valued every dollar she earned and dreamed of becoming a lawyer to protect those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But there was one constant in her life that would later become her curse: Sheila Eddy. They met when they were 8 years old. Sheila was vibrant. She had that inexplicable spark that draws people in, a charisma mixed with a slight edge of defiance. In the Neese household, Sheila was adored. She was the second daughter. She knew where the spoons were kept in the kitchen. She slept in the twin bed next to Skylar during endless sleepovers, and she was a part of every family holiday. Dave Neese would later say, "If you had asked me then, I would have given my life for Sheila without a second thought." But Sheila had another side. She grew up in a single-parent home after her parents' divorce, and her mother, Tara, seemed to try to compensate for the father's absence with excessive freedom. In the Eddy house, there were no strict rules. Anything went. Sheila learned early on how to wear masks. To adults, she was the sweet girl next door, but behind the closed doors of her bedroom, she was beginning to taste the power she held over those around her. In high school at University High, a third girl joined their tight duo, Rachel Schoaf. Rachel was the total opposite of Sheila. She grew up in a deeply religious, conservative family. Theater, church choir, a flawless reputation. She was the good girl who desperately wanted to be cool. And Sheila Eddy became her gateway into the world of bad girls. Rachel gravitated towards Sheila, copying her style, her laugh, and her cynicism. Thus, the trio was formed. The 3 Graces of Morgantown. They were inseparable. If you opened Twitter in 2011, you saw their endless digital footprint, hundreds of photos, the girls hugging in front of school lockers, the girls eating pizza, the girls swearing love until the end of time. But the laws of psychology are harsh. A trio is rarely stable. There are always two who are closer, and one who becomes extra. By the spring of 2012, the temperature in their relationship began to drop, even as the West Virginia heat climbed above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Skylar began to notice Sheila and Rachel whispering whenever she entered the room. She saw them creating group chats she wasn't invited to. Why was this happening? Skylar was too good. She was a moral compass that began to irritate Sheila. Sheila wanted to experiment with alcohol, with shoplifting, with relationships, and Skylar knew their secrets. There is a version of events, later confirmed by witnesses, that Skylar had witnessed an intimate encounter between Sheila and Rachel. In a small town where Rachel sang in the church choir, such a secret was a death sentence for a reputation. Sheila Eddy, whose character was already showing traits of a classic narcissist, could not forgive her friend for holding her by the throat with that knowledge. "She's going to tell on us," Sheila would whisper to Rachel during their secret car rides outside of town. "Skylar is a rat. She pretends to be a saint, but she'll destroy us both." Look at their Twitter feeds from that period. It is a true chronicle of the disintegration of a human soul. Skylar writes, "It's amazing how fast people forget everything good you've ever done for them." Sheila replies, never mentioning a name, but everyone knows who it's for. "Some people just need to learn to keep their mouths shut before they get shut for them." It was a slow burn, a heavy, dragging buildup of dread. Sheila began the psychological grooming of Rachel. She isolated her from other friends, convincing her that only the two of them understood the true nature of things. Rachel, follower-prone and addicted to the approval of the cool friend, gradually lost touch with reality. To them, killing Skylar wasn't a crime, it was a project, a way to purge their world of an inconvenient witness. In June 2012, as the summer in Morgantown hit its peak, the plan was finalized. They didn't just want to fight with Skylar. They discussed how to strike so she wouldn't have time to scream. They discussed whether the hole in the woods of Pennsylvania, 30 miles from their school, would be deep enough. Skylar still believed it was just a rough patch. She loved them. She missed the times when the three of them watched movies and dreamed of graduation. She had no idea that her sisters had already bought shovels and hidden them in the trunk of Sheila's black Toyota. A 16-year-old girl, an honor student, her parents' pride. She walked toward her death with an open heart, believing that friendship was forever. She didn't realize that for Sheila Eddy, forever was only the length of time she wanted Skylar to stay silent. Breaking any bond is painful. But when that bond shatters in the airtight, hermetic world of three teenage girls, the pain turns into a toxic sediment that begins to corrode everything around it. By mid-2012, the friendship between Skylar, Sheila, and Rachel had transformed into a field of psychological warfare. To understand why Sheila Eddy decided her best friend had to die, we have to look inside her head. Sheila wasn't just a mean girl from a high school movie. She was a classic manipulator. To her, people were tools, and Skylar Niece, who had known Sheila for too long and too well, had stopped being a useful tool. She had become an inconvenient witness. In June, Morgantown was melting. Temperatures often climbed over 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and in that stifling heat, Skylar's frustration grew. She saw her place beside Sheila being taken by Rachel, a girl who, only a year ago, was just an attachment to their duo. But there was one specific incident, the black swan, that flipped the switch. One evening, during yet another sleepover, Skylar reportedly witnessed an intimate sexual encounter between Sheila and Rachel. In the context of modern America, this might seem like a triviality, but not in Morgantown. Not for Rachel Schoaf, whose family was a pillar of Christian morality, and certainly not for Sheila Eddy, whose entire status was built on the image of the perfect popular girl. Sheila realized that Skylar now held power over her. One word, and Sheila's reputation would be scorched. One word, and Rachel would be cast out of her family. Skylar didn't intend to blackmail them. She was simply hurt and disillusioned. She began to post on Twitter, never naming names, but with terrifying bluntness. She wrote, "I really did everything for you, and you just wiped your feet on me." And later, "I have secrets that could destroy your lives, but I'm not like you." To Sheila Eddy, this was a declaration of war. She didn't see these words as a cry for help. She saw them as a direct threat. That was when, in late June, the idea was born. Not to end the friendship, not to move to another town, but to delete the source of the threat. "We have to get rid of her," Sheila told Rachel during one of their drives along the back roads. Imagine the scene. Two girls, music on the radio, wind blowing through open windows, and Sheila's voice, casual, almost bored, suggesting a murder. Rachel initially took it as a joke, but Sheila wasn't joking. She began to methodically, day after day, program Rachel. "She's going to tell Rachel. Your parents will find out. They'll lock you up. They'll hate you. The only way we can be free is if Skylar disappears." It was the masterwork of a psychopath. Sheila created a false dilemma for Rachel. Either Skylar dies, or Rachel's own life is destroyed. There was no other choice. They began to plan. This wasn't an impulsive decision. They discussed it during classes. They messaged in private chats. 1, 2, 3, Sheila suggested. "That will be our signal. When I say 3, we attack." They prepared a death kit. In the trunk of Sheila's Toyota, alongside beach towels and textbooks, now sat 2 shovels bought at a hardware store on the edge of town. There were also bottles of bleach and a change of clothes. Sheila even thought about which knives to take, the sharpest ones from her mother's kitchen set. The motive, "we just didn't like her anymore," is Sheila Eddy's greatest lie. In reality, it was fear. A fear of exposure mixed with absolute ice-cold sociopathy. Sheila didn't feel guilt. She only felt a logical necessity. Skylar had become a bug in her perfect system, and bugs are meant to be erased. On July 6th, Skylar posted her final tweet. "Sick of this fakeness. Just want everything to be honest." She didn't know that honesty would come for her in the form of 2 kitchen knives. That evening, Sheila called her. Her voice was soft and inviting. "Skylar, enough fighting. We're acting like kids. Let's just go to our spot, smoke, look at the stars and talk it all out. Please, we miss you." Skylar wanted to believe her. The heart of this girl, who weighed only 120 pounds, was too big for her own good. She believed in forgiveness. She believed that 8 years of friendship meant more than a few weeks of fighting. She agreed. As the sun set behind the West Virginia hills and the heat began to drop to a comfortable 75 degrees Fahrenheit, Skylar started to get ready. She didn't know that outside her room, in the darkness of the parking lot, it wasn't her friends waiting for her. It was executioners who had been sharpening their blades for days. For Sheila Eddy, this was a game, the final level she intended to play perfectly. For Rachel Schoaf, it was a nightmare she had allowed herself to be dragged into, and one from which there was no longer an escape. The car started. Ahead lay a 30-mile trip into the dark and the final 40 minutes of Skylar Neese's life. "We're here. Come out." 12:30 a.m. Skylar enters her room and closes the door. She knows her parents, Dave and Mary, are already asleep behind the wall. The apartment is silent, save for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of the highway. Skylar approaches the window. She takes nothing with her, no purse, no jacket, even though the night chill has begun to replace the day's heat, and the temperature has dropped to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. She is certain she will be back in an hour. She carefully removes the screen and places it on the floor. With one practiced movement, she is out on the grass. Her weight, a mere 120 pounds, allows her to move almost soundlessly. She crosses the parking lot and sees Sheila's familiar silver sedan. Skylar climbs into the back seat. Skylar says, "Hey." She tries to sound casual. Sheila Eddy is behind the wheel. She gives a short nod and smiles into the rearview mirror. Rachel, in the passenger seat, doesn't even turn around. She is staring out the side window. The car pulls away. They leave Morgantown, heading north toward the Pennsylvania border. Imagine this drive. 30 miles along dark, winding roads where the headlights catch nothing but endless walls of forest. Pop hits from that summer play on the radio. Sheila drives confidently, chatting about school and mutual friends, creating the illusion of those good old times Skylar had been so desperate to reclaim. Skylar begins to relax. She believes the ice is finally breaking. She doesn't notice Rachel Schoaf in the front seat, white-knuckled and gripping the door handle. She doesn't see the 2 kitchen knives with 6-inch blades hidden under the front floor mats. In the trunk, the shovels and a blue plastic bottle of bleach bounce rhythmically with every bump in the road. They cross the state line. The road becomes narrow and broken. Sheila turns onto a dirt path leading to a secluded hollow near the town of Brave. This is their spot, the place where they used to build bonfires and swear eternal friendship. The car stops. Sheila cuts the engine but leaves the headlights on. The beams pierce the darkness, casting long, ugly shadows from the trees. Sheila says, "Let's get out. I have cigarettes." They step out. Skylar takes a deep breath. The air here is cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth. They walk about 20 feet into the woods. Sheila says, "Crap, I forgot the lighter in the car. Guys, wait here. I'll be right back." It was a rehearsed lie. Sheila goes to the car, but not for a lighter. She grabs the knives. Rachel stands next to Skylar, her body shaking, though it's hidden by the dark. Sheila returns, hands behind her back. She walks up to them, almost touching. The forest air feels electrified. Skylar stands with her back to her friends, looking up at the stars, which seem unbearably bright away from the city lights. She feels safe. She is with her sisters. Sheila takes a deep breath and utters the phrase. Her voice is calm, almost mundane, as if starting a children's game. Sheila says, 1, 2, 3. In that instant, Skylar Niece's world explodes in pain. Sheila delivers the first strike to her back. The knife enters easily, slicing through flesh and puncturing a lung. Skylar gasps, not a scream, but a startled, choking sound. She spins around, her eyes wide with terror. In the glare of the headlights, she sees her friends' faces. On Sheila's face, there is icy resolve. On Rachel's, a panic that has turned into rage. Skylar screams, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Instead of an answer, Rachel Schoaf lunges at her from the front. Skylar tries to defend herself. She grabs the blade with her bare hands, trying to push it away from her stomach. Detectives would later find cuts on her fingers reaching the bone, the marks of her desperate final struggle for life. Skylar tries to run. She makes it only 10 feet, tripping over roots and branches. No, Sheila Eddy is faster. She tackles her, pins her to the ground, and continues to strike. Blow after blow, in the neck, in the chest, in the face. Sheila's knife snaps at one point from the force of the attack, but she doesn't stop. In total, they will stab Skylar more than 50 times. Finally, Skylar goes silent. Her body, mangled and bloody, grows still in the dust of the forest road. A dead silence follows. The only sounds are the heavy breathing of 2 killers and the chirping of crickets, indifferent to the human tragedy. Rachel collapses to her knees and vomits. Sheila stands over the body, wiping sweat from her forehead. She is absolutely calm. She walks over to Skylar, leans down and stares into her glazed eyes. Sheila whispers, "Well, that's that." They fetch the shovels, but the plan hit a snag. The soil in this part of Pennsylvania is too rocky. They dig for 10 minutes, 15, but the hole barely reaches a depth of 1 foot. Sheila says, "It's useless. Let's just drag her deeper into the brush." They grab Skylar by the legs and haul her body, leaving a trail of blood on the fallen leaves. Deep in the woods, they pile old boards, branches, and rocks over her. Sheila covers Skylar's face with debris, as if she doesn't want her looking back at her from under the earth. They return to the car. Sheila pulls out the bleach. She methodically pours it over the back seat and the floor mats. They change into the clean clothes they had carefully packed. Their blood-soaked jeans and t-shirts are stuffed into trash bags. On the way back, they stop at a small creek. Sheila washes her hands, carefully scrubbing the blood from under her fingernails. She looks at her reflection in the dark water and fixes her hair. At 4 in the morning, Sheila drops Rachel off at her house. Sheila says, "Sleep tight. The problem is solved." Sheila goes home, gets into bed, and falls asleep. She sleeps soundly, without dreams, while miles away, Dave Neese walks into his daughter's empty room and sees the open window, where the first morning fly is already buzzing against the glass. It was Sheila Eddy. Her voice on the line was bright, with just a hint of morning rasp. Sheila says, "Hi, Mr. Neese. Is Skylar home? We went for a little drive last night, and I dropped her off around midnight. Did she make it inside?" It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Sheila didn't wait to be called. She struck first, creating her alibi and planting a false trail simultaneously. She told the parents she had dropped Skylar off at the corner instead of the front door because Skylar didn't want to wake them with the sound of the car. Dave believed her. How could he not believe the girl he treated like a second daughter? The Morgantown police were initially slow to react. A 16-year-old girl leaving through a window. To officers, it was a textbook runaway case. They told the parents, "Just wait, she'll come home when she's ready." They all rebel at this age. But Mary Neese knew better. Skylar weighed only 120 pounds and was a homebody. She hadn't taken her phone charger. She hadn't taken a jacket. She wasn't planning on being gone for long. Meanwhile, Sheila began her greatest performance. She became the shadow of the Neese family. She was there every single day. Imagine this. Sheila Eddy sitting on Skylar's bed, going through her things, helping Mary look through phone records. She hugged the grieving mother, feeling the heat of her tears, and whispered. Sheila says, "Don't cry, Mary. We're going to find her. I promise, we'll find her." It was the ultimate height of cynicism. While search parties combed the woods within a 10-mile radius of the city, Sheila was on the front lines. She handed out flyers with Skylar's face on them. She cried on the shoulder of the school counselor. She even took to Twitter, posting, "Skylar, please come home. I miss you so much. My heart is broken." But while Sheila thrived on the drama, Rachel Schoaf began to crumble. She stopped leaving her house. During that stifling week in July, when the West Virginia heat soared to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, Rachel sat in her room behind heavy curtains. She felt sick every time her phone buzzed with a notification. She watched Sheila lie with such terrifying ease, and it scared her even more than the murder itself. She realized she had tied herself to someone who wasn't entirely human. Investigators, however, were starting to find the first cracks. Detective Jessica Colbank, who was assigned to the case, had a sharp instinct for fakes. When she first interviewed Sheila and Rachel together, she noticed something chilling. The girls told their story using the exact same words. It wasn't a memory. It was a script. "You dropped her off at the corner?" Detective Colbank asked, staring hard at Sheila. Sheila says, "Yes." She waved at us and walked toward the apartment. It was about 12:30 a.m. The detective shifted her gaze to Rachel. Rachel looked away and nodded. Her hands were shaking under the table, white-knuckling the hem of her shirt. Then came the surveillance footage. Grainy video from the apartment complex showed the silver sedan entering the parking lot at 12:30 a.m. Skylar is seen climbing out the window and into the back seat. But a camera at the city limits caught that same car 3 hours later, coming back from a completely different direction. And there were only 2 people inside. Sheila didn't blink. She claimed that after dropping Skylar off, they just kept driving for a few hours. Sheila says, "We were listening to music, talking about boys. You know how it is with girls." But Twitter began to betray them. Skylar had been an active user, and detectives analyzed her final posts. "Sick of your lies," she had written. "You think you're going to get away with everything?" These weren't the posts of a happy girl planning to run away. These were the screams of a victim being backed into a corner. A month passed, then 2. August brought thunderstorms to Morgantown and a heavy sense of dread. The Neese family was desperate. Dave began his own investigation, driving for hours along the same roads Sheila claimed to have taken that night. He had no idea he had passed within a few hundred feet of the spot where his daughter lay, under a pile of branches and stones. The pressure from the police intensified. The FBI officially joined the case, realizing Skylar had likely been kidnapped. Sheila and Rachel were called in for questioning again and again. Sheila was a rock. She even started acting indignant with the investigators. Sheila says, "Why are you bothering me? I'm her best friend. I'm the one helping you the most." But Rachel Schoaf was at the breaking point. By December, when the snow began to fall and the temperature dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, she couldn't carry the weight anymore. Her parents saw that something horrific was happening to their daughter. She wasn't sleeping, she was barely eating. She had lost nearly 15 pounds. On December 28th, Rachel suffered a nervous breakdown. She began screaming, acting hysterically, and was eventually hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, in the silence of a hospital ward, away from the icy control of Sheila Eddy, the good girl mask finally shattered. She realized Sheila would never confess. Sheila would go to the end, and if necessary, she would throw Rachel under the bus. And so, Rachel Schoaf called a lawyer. On January 3rd, 2013, she left the clinic and went straight to the police station. She sat in a small interrogation room, looked at Detective Colbank, and spoke the words that tore through the 6-month nightmare. Rachel says, "We killed her. We planned it all back in June." At that very moment, Sheila Eddy was sitting at home, tweeting another joke about being bored. She had no idea her perfect script had just become her own death warrant. Rachel Schoaf sat in the back of a police SUV, looking pale, almost translucent. She was leading the investigative team along the same roads they had traveled 6 months earlier. But the landscape had changed. The lush green hollow where crickets had chirped in July had turned into a monochrome labyrinth of naked trunks and snowdrifts. Rachel says, "I'm not sure. Everything looks different. I think it was there, past that turn." Detectives spent hours scouring the woods. They used probes, metal detectors, and search dogs. Rachel led them from one tree to another, shaking from both the cold and the sheer terror of what they were doing. She knew that if the body wasn't found, her confession might be dismissed as the ramblings of a mentally unstable teenager, and Sheila would walk free once again. Finally, about 30 feet from the edge of the dirt road, an officer noticed a strange pile of branches and flat stones in a depression. When the snow was cleared away, the search team saw something that made even veteran forensic investigators look away. It wasn't Skylar, not the vibrant 120-pound girl from the flyers. 6 months in the elements, the work of scavengers, and the changing seasons had taken their toll. The remains were heavily skeletonized, but the details remained. Scraps of clothing, a familiar t-shirt, and most importantly, the rocky soil that had prevented the killers from digging a deep grave had effectively preserved her under that improvised cairn. While the experts worked in the woods, Another stage of the investigation was unfolding back in Morgantown, one that was digital and technical. Police obtained a warrant for a full forensic search of Sheila Eddy's car. It was the same silver Toyota that Sheila had scrubbed with such ferocity. At first glance, the interior was pristine. Sheila had used so much bleach that the car still smelled of harsh chemicals. She was confident she'd gotten away with it, but she had underestimated modern science. Criminalists pulled out the back seat, and there, in the narrow crevices between the iron frame and the upholstery, places no rag could reach, they found it. Blood. Dark stains that flared with a ghostly blue light under the spray of luminol. DNA testing confirmed it. This was Skylar Neese's blood, but the most shocking discovery came from the analysis of their Twitter accounts. Detectives hired cybersecurity specialists to recover deleted messages and analyze the timeline of their posts. What they saw was a portrait of true madness. Sheila Eddy had continued to post even on the days when the police had already found the remains but hadn't announced it publicly yet. One of Sheila's posts read, "We really did go to Pennsylvania," followed by a sad emoticon. She was playing with the police. She was enjoying her role as the star witness. She was so confident in her power over Rachel that she never even considered the possibility of betrayal. The investigation reconstructed a minute-by-minute chronology of that night. They now knew that while Dave and Mary Neese were frantic, searching the apartment for their daughter, Sheila and Rachel had gone into the bathroom at Sheila's house. They hadn't just washed their hands. They had methodically scrubbed the kitchen knives with abrasive cleaners. Those same knives were then returned to the block in Sheila's mother's kitchen. Imagine, for months, an unsuspecting Tara Eddy used those knives to cut bread and meat for dinner, while her daughter sat across from her, hiding the secret of 50 stab wounds. February 11th, 2013. The DNA results were final. The police had everything. The confession of one, the blood in the car of the other, and irrefutable digital evidence of their conspiracy. Sheila Eddy's arrest was planned like a surgical operation. Detectives knew she could be dangerous. They intercepted her in the parking lot of a local restaurant. When officers approached her and presented the warrant for her arrest on charges of first-degree murder, Sheila didn't become hysterical. She didn't scream about her innocence. She simply looked at Detective Colbank. It was a long, heavy gaze, devoid of any human emotion. Sheila says, "You're making a mistake." Those were the only words she spoke. Handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The weight of those iron bracelets was nothing compared to the weight of the lies she had carried for half a year. At the same time, the phone rang at the Neese home. Dave picked up. He was told the remains had been found and identified. He walked out onto the balcony, looked at that window in Skylar's room, and for the first time in 6 months, he wept. But these weren't tears of relief. They were tears of the realization that the monsters he had been searching for across the state had been sitting in his living room, drinking his tea, the entire time. The exposure was complete. But the most important question remained. How would the justice system handle 2 girls who had committed a crime devoid of any meaning, other than a cold desire to delete a friend from their lives? The contrast between the 2 killers in the courtroom was so stark, it was more terrifying than the crime itself. Rachel Schoaf was the first to face the court. In May 2013, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She looked like a shadow of the energetic theater student she once was, hunched shoulders, a bowed head, and endless sobbing that nearly drowned out the words of her attorneys. When Rachel was given the floor for her final statement, she could barely stand. Her voice, broken by gasps, barely reached the back rows. Rachel says, I cannot find the words to express the depth of my remorse. I deprived the world of a beautiful person. I deprived parents of their only light, their only child. I betrayed everything I believed in. I will carry this weight, this image of Skylar in the woods, until my very last breath. Forgive me, if that is even possible." It looked like repentance. But to Skylar's parents, these words were merely bitter ash. They knew Rachel only spoke up when she realized she had been caught. But the true horror awaited the courtroom in January 2014, when Sheila Eddy took the stand. If you want to see the face of absolute pure sociopathy, look at the footage from that day. Sheila entered the room with her head held high. She wasn't in a prison jumpsuit. Her parents had hired expensive lawyers and she was in civilian clothes. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, but that wasn't what was frightening. A slight, almost imperceptible smirk was frozen on her face. The same smirk Twitter users had seen in her selfies days after the murder. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She looked at Mary Neese with a cold, almost scientific interest, as if studying the suffering of another biological species. Sheila pleaded guilty to first-degree murder only to avoid the possibility of the death penalty, even though, as a minor, she was already facing a maximum of life. Dave Neese couldn't take it. His voice, cracked and full of poisonous rage, echoed through the hall when he was given the floor for his victim impact statement. Dave says, "Sheila Eddy, I looked you in the eye while you sat on my couch and lied to me. You ate my food, you hugged my wife, knowing what you had done to our daughter. You are not human. You are a monster who pretended to be our friend. You took our everything, our joy, our future, our faith in people. I hope every day of your life in prison reminds you of what you did. And I hope you never, do you hear me, never see daylight again." Sheila didn't even blink. She continued to stare straight ahead, adjusting her hair with her shackled hands. The sentences were read in dead silence. Rachel Schoaf was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Under the law, she gained the right to apply for parole only after serving a minimum of 10 years. It was a term many considered too lenient for participation in such a slaughter. Sheila Eddy was sentenced to life in prison. The judge, passing the sentence, noted her frightening lack of empathy and inability to feel human compassion. Under West Virginia law, she gained the right to a parole hearing after 15 years, but prosecutors made it clear they would do everything to ensure that right remained purely theoretical. As Sheila was led from the courtroom, the chains on her ankles clinked rhythmically and heavily against the tiled floor. She didn't turn back to look at her sobbing parents. She walked into the cold void of the prison blocks with the same icy dignity with which she had once counted 1, 2, 3 in the dark woods of Pennsylvania. Justice was achieved on paper, but that evening Morgantown did not celebrate. The town realized a terrible truth. Evil does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it grows in the house next door, goes to the same school, and smiles at you from a smartphone screen, planning your demise during a break between history lessons. But what became of those who turned her life to ash? Rachel Schoaf continues to serve her sentence. In 2023, she became eligible for parole for the first time. She wept before the board, spoke of God, of how she had changed, and how she prays for Skylar's soul every day. But Skylar's parents were there. Dave Neese looked at her and said just one phrase, "My daughter will never walk out of her grave, so why should you walk out of prison?" Her parole was denied. Rachel Schoaf remains behind bars, still trying to convince the world that she was a victim of circumstances and Sheila's influence. And Sheila Eddy herself? She remains true to her image until the end. In the Lacan Correctional Center, she is persona non grata. According to reports from fellow inmates, Sheila still carries herself as if she's the queen of the high school. Not a shadow of remorse, not a drop of sympathy. She is still that same girl who once counted 1, 2, 3. Only now her world is confined by concrete walls and barbed wire. Her eligibility for a parole hearing will come in a few years, but it is unlikely anyone in West Virginia will ever want to see her free again. Dave and Mary Neese never moved out of that apartment. They still live where their daughter once laughed. The window in Skylar's bedroom is now always closed and secured with several locks. Dave often takes his car and drives those same 30 miles to the site of her death. He sits on a folding chair by the memorial, looks out at the forest, and smokes, remembering the girl who weighed only 120 pounds, but whose love for life was boundless. This story is not just a tale of a murder. It is a warning. In a world where we measure friendship by the number of likes and enmity by petty comments online, it's easy to forget that behind every profile is a living, breathing human being. We often ask, where were the parents? No, the truth is, the parents were right there. They loved, they cared, they trusted. But they couldn't look under the masks that their children had learned to wear with the virtuosity of professional actors. Look at your friends. Look at those you trust with your secrets. Female friendship is a great power, but when it mutates into obsession and cold calculation, it becomes the most dangerous weapon in the world. Remember Skylar Neese. Remember her open smile and her final why, which still echoes through the woods of Pennsylvania when the temperature drops and the shadows grow long. Hold your children close, and never forget that sometimes the most terrifying evil is the one smiling back at you from the rearview mirror. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below.